I Hate the News is the weekly news bulletin from I Hate Politics podcast, a show about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. It's May 5th, 2026. Wootton High School cluster parents, Alisa and Pavel Sohobek, file a complaint with the Maryland State Department of Education alleging wrongful decision by MCPS to close Wootton High School at its current location on Wootton Parkway and to move the school to the Crown High School site in Gaithersburg. Alisa Sohobek joins us to explain their complaint. Changes are coming to math education in Maryland and in Montgomery County, and two highly engaged MCPS parents, Evelyn Chung and Emily Appel, break it down. And did you know about the case of the Oklahoma woman who was arrested on a Montgomery County warrant and held in Maryland for 5 months based on incorrect facial recognition match? ACLU has filed complaints against Montgomery, Prince George's, and Anne Arundel police departments and is seeking compensation and change in technology policy. And more. Stay with us.
What's the matter? You seem so surprised. Glancing in the morning paper tonight. Seems that the French can capitalize. Another execution, another spy. Green general didn't die. Watch his family cry. Watch his family cry.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Silver Spring rock musician J.D. Brayton, who goes by the stage name Mr. Tree Frog. The two songs we play in this episode are Halo and Troubled Sleep. You can find his music on Bandcamp.
The Czechs are barking for a nuclear call. Nairobi got hungry, so they started a war. Famous senators face the law. Babylon discovered she was a hoe with a halo.
As school politics go, the fight to save Wootton High School at its current location on Wootton Parkway is turning out to be epic. MCPS and the Board of Education have decided to close the old building in the city of Rockville and give the community a spanking new school but 4 miles away in the city of Gaithersburg. The school community is upset. While MCPS calls it a change of location, the community is calling it school closure. After their advocacy efforts were rejected by the Board of Education, we are now at the next level of escalation. A complaint to the state agency that governs school districts, the Maryland Department of Education. The couple fronting the complaint are Alisa and Pavel Sohobek. They are themselves 2007 Wootton graduates, and now their first child goes to Lakewood Elementary School, which feeds to Wootton High School. And they have a second child getting ready to go to Lakewood. Alisa Sohobek joins us to explain the complaint.
There's actually 5 core issues within the State Board of Appeals complaint. The first is just really bad data. As part of this process, we actually engaged a third-party independent consultant, a demographer, who has 20 years of experience in the field. So he did analysis and he agrees with the assessment that there's been some really bad suspect data. We saw the same kind of comments coming from state senators like Senator Cheryl Kagan, who said this is bad data. So that's one of the core issues, that the data has been arbitrary and unreasonable and therefore cannot be relied upon. The second core issue is the closure issue. MCPS calls it relocation. Sometimes they call it transfer of assets, and I keep saying they can call it anything they want, but doesn't change the fact that this is a closure. And I could get into like the legal precedent as to why this is a closure. But if you agree that this is a closure, the reason why this is so problematic is because all of the legal protections afforded to school closure have not been applied here. The third core issue is state funding. So Crown High School has received a significant amount of state funding, close to $100 million, which is about 45% of the total cost of the high school. So almost half of the high school is being contributed by the state through state funds. And MCPS, when they initially asked for state funds, they asked for state funds because they said, hey, this area is really overcrowded, right? We need a new high school to help alleviate overcrowding. Now they're saying the purpose has completely changed. The problem is they haven't really justified this change at the fireside chat at Wootton that Dr. Taylor came to 9 days before the March 26th vote. I asked him this question directly, and he said in a room full of people, we will not proceed until we have state permission for option H. He's on record saying that. And still, it went down the way it went down. The fourth core issue is the one subject rule. How they went about the voting was very surprising to me. I was in the room on March 26th. I was sitting in the audience after I had testified. And they went about the vote in a very unusual way in the sense that they bundled everything together. They said, okay, we're going to vote on both boundary studies, Woodward and the Crown study together. But then they also put in the regional programming together, which is very unusual considering that those two are completely different issues. Like you could argue, okay, the two boundary studies are on the same topic, same subject overall, but regional programming is completely different. It's not about facility use or boundaries. It's about a whole county-wide change that's different in subject and scope and impact. And according to both legal precedent and the Maryland Constitution, you could only vote on one subject at a time. So I don't believe that the community has been meaningfully engaged. I think the decision was made up a while ago, and they kind of did a check the box. One, they said, hey, our data says that we don't have the kids for Crown High School, and therefore we need to rethink about this boundary study. This is back on, I believe, October 30th. They passed a resolution to change the scope of the boundary study, and I have it in writing. I could read it out loud. But essentially, they said we need to explore Crown as a swing school, as a holding school, because we don't have the kids to justify it. Never, ever did they amend the scope to say we want to relocate schools such that we can make sure we can fill this new high school, right? So even if you buy the argument, this is not closure, for their own resolution, their own scope, that wasn't even a consideration on the table. And what's really interesting is that on that same day, in that same resolution, they also said, I'm going to quote them now because these are their words, there be no other changes to the high school and middle schools included in the existing scope.
What did MCPS say about the data and why you object specifically to MCPS's understanding of the data? They have said that MCPS, since before COVID, has dropped some 10,000 students up until now. So say 2019 to 2026, 6-7 years, the MCPS has declined by about 10,000. Is that not true?
So there are a couple of factors. It's COVID. It's also a fleet of international students. It's also government jobs. So we think that these are all events that are happening together in a perfect storm, but they're not going to happen in the long term. Even within the decline, it is not a uniform decline, right? So it's not that every single cluster and every single community experience exact same decline. In our own analysis, as well as a third-party analysis, in our cluster in particular, there's actually stronger growth compared to the rest of the community. According to the Maryland Department of Planning, so their own internal data, not our data, the state data, they are suggesting that it's going to be stable through 2028, but then we're going to see growth starting in 2029 and throughout 2034. They're projecting a 3% increase in high school enrollment. So not even, kids in general, but high school enrollment. I think part of the issue is that's self-inflicted, right? A lot of parents since the pandemic have gone to homeschool or a private school or other ways to educate their children. And I think part of that is a frustration. We saw how MCPS handled the pandemic and handled parent concerns. And then we shouldn't be surprised when we see a decrease in public school enrollment.
Superintendent Taylor's primary argument may be that he is not closing Wootton. He's just giving it a new school.
There's a case in Allegheny County. This is Marsh versus Allegheny. And they did something very similar to what MCPS is doing here. They closed down a school, moved it to a different city miles away. And in that case, the state board did say closure rules apply.
What's the next steps?
Right, we have a whole another round of elementary school boundary studies. So I think if you are a parent who's concerned about what's happening in Montgomery County with respect to Wootton, you should also be, concerned about what's happening next. Already, when I've been going to these meetings and looking at the board documents, I am concerned about what they're going to do with elementary school studies. We're seeing some of the same tactics happening. The scope is already changing. On the outset, they said, hey, elementary school study, your secondary school assignments or high school assignments will not change through this boundary study. That's no longer true. They passed a amended scope in resolution on the same day as the Wootton vote on March 26, where they said in certain instances, your secondary high school assignments can change through the elementary school boundary study.
Alyssa Sahobak, thank you for taking the time. Please come back when you know more.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
More education news. Maryland is introducing new math standards and MCPS is changing its curriculum. The Montgomery County Board of Education just okayed the changes last week. To break down the changes, MCPS parent and education activist Evelyn Chung stepped up to interview Emily Appel, another parent who sits on MCPS's Curriculum Advisory Committee for Math.
Emily, there's been a lot of buzz about the proposed state changes to math curriculum and the math framework. Can you tell us a little about it?
Yeah, big picture, Maryland is doing a redesign of how math is taught elementary through high school. First is that the standards K-8 got a refresh. Some standards were revised, removed, and the standards were reorganized slightly. Another big change is this integrated math policy. Maryland is replacing its Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2 pathway with an integrated course sequence, Integrated Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. And that'll be rolled out not this coming school year, but the following school year. There's a new focus on acceleration. It's starting a little earlier. Students in grades 3 through 7 must be evaluated annually for acceleration using multiple measures. There also needs to be universal access to rigor. So all schools are required to offer a pathway to algebra by middle school. The daily time in math is actually going to shift a little bit. So we'll see an increase, particularly in our middle schools, of at least 60 minutes of math daily. And there's also a focus on shifting away from tracking. So creating more equitable access for students instead of sorting into those high or low groups early.
So what is the difference between integrated algebra and what we have now?
The sequence has been revised. The standards have been reorganized. So instead of having an Algebra 1 course, then a full geometry course, and an Algebra 2 course, the geometry standards have been combined or sort of condensed into the Integrated Algebra 1 and Integrated Algebra 2. What's interesting is that this shift from a 3-year sequence to a 2-year sequence is unique. Many other states have shifted to an integrated algebra approach, but they have a 3-year sequence. So the same content is being taught over 3 years, and Maryland has chosen a 2-year sequence.
For students that complete the tier track and want to go on to higher level math, calculus-based math, will they be prepared for that higher level math?
The state of Maryland would say yes. I think we don't know yet. There are 3 secondary math pathways that the state is proposing as part of the math policy shifts. One is that there'll be a quantitative reasoning pathway. One is data statistics and data analytics. And then the other is Algebra Foundations of Calculus. So I think what you'll see in the 2 that are not calculus focused is hopefully some courses and some options for students that might be more focused on data. The use of data could even potentially be focused on things like financial literacy. The state hasn't listed specific courses yet. They've just announced the overall pathways and given some potential options.
And what is MCPS doing to prepare for this overall shift? Do they have a curriculum ready for this?
The new materials were adopted just this week at the board meeting. So MCPS is going to be adopting Amplified Desmos Math for K through Integrated Algebra. This is a set of curriculum materials that is really well designed to help students deeply understand the math. It's designed in a way that gives students access to rigorous tasks and conversation. And so by adopting this, MCPS is really sort of setting at least the floor to be in a good place for making this shift. I think a couple of other shifts that MCPS is focused on is deepening professional development. So there's work being done during the summer that coincides with the professional development series the state's putting out around the new math standards, around the shift, around the numeracy development framework, and some of these other changes that Maryland has put in place. And then I think the MCPS math team is focused on sort of the longer term picture when thinking about pieces of the policy that are not rolling out this coming year, but are rolling out in future years. So shifts like the number of minutes in middle school, shifts like the integrated algebra course sequence, and even shifts like the acceleration guidance. Those aren't coming in this next school year. And so there's something that MCPS is preparing for a little more long term.
Sounds like this shift is going to need a lot of training for the teachers. I mean, as good as the curriculum is, doesn't it matter how it's implemented? So how is MCPS addressing that?
As of now, there is 1 day of curriculum-based training this summer. And then I believe MCPS's plan is to use the cross-functional teams to do some job-embedded coaching with teachers. The question mark I still have is around the volume of planning time that teachers have access to. Teachers only have 2 hours a month of required planning time. And so this really limits any content specialists, any cross-functional team members' ability to meet with teachers and really focus deeply on the math.
The 2 hour a week time limit, has that always been the case? When we started the new elementary reading specialists, did they only get 2 hours a month with the teachers?
This is new. It's connected with the teachers union contract. And unfortunately, the way the contract is worded right now is that only 2 hours a month can be required of teachers. And so that planning time is really limited. And that's 2 hours, not just in math, it's 2 hours total. So that needs to be split across both literacy, math, science, social studies, sort of any other subject teachers are teaching.
Where are we in MCPS on 60 minutes of instructional time each day, or do we need to change our scheduling for that?
So in elementary schools, we likely won't see the overall schedule change. In middle school, we will need to make some adjustments. In middle school, there is not yet 60 minutes daily. MCPS is working to think about how they might revise the middle school schedule in order to meet that 60-minute requirement. I believe there's been a working group over the past few months to try and figure out what adjustments could be made to the schedule. I think some of the complicating factors are how you meet the demands and requirements of all subjects in a middle school, while also still offering electives and also still offering any resource or intervention that students might need.
People are really concerned that they'll lose the electives in fine arts or computer electives and music.
Yeah, I do know that the folks that worked on the working group were really conscious about making sure that they were preserving as much access as possible to all those pieces.
Could they move to, let's say, a block schedule? I think Tacoma Park Middle School used to have a block schedule, and I believe with a block schedule that you do get an extra elective or period to play with.
I think they were considering lots of different options.
So let's talk about math acceleration. You had said that the new math policy discourages segregating students and tracking. In addition, I took a look at the Maryland report card data, and I ran the numbers to see how many students who are taking geometry in middle school. So those are the students that have been accelerated, usually through compacted math in elementary school, and are taking the geometry state assessment in middle school. And I looked at those numbers, and roughly 57% of those students are passing the state assessment, which suggests that a sizable number of those students that are on this accelerated track are not actually meeting state standards by 7th or 8th grade when they take geometry. So what does that mean for our students and the compacted math pathways? What happens to the students and to compacted math now?
state thinks it's very important to have both on and off ramps for students so that students are given opportunities to both move into enrichment groups or acceleration groups and move out of them if it's no longer appropriate. I think this is probably a shift from what we've had in the past, where students end up on an accelerated track and often remain on that accelerated track. Part of the state acceleration guidance does put some guideposts in place around the type of acceleration that should be happening. The state has decided that students who were distinguished or level 4 on MCAP are eligible for automatic acceleration. According to the Maryland State Report Card, around 8% of students in last year's MCAP scored a 4 on MCAP. So that 8% of students would be the students that are eligible for automatic acceleration. Now, it's not the only way that students could be accelerated. The state has said that there needs to be multiple measures to determine whether or not a student is eligible or is ready for that course acceleration. Those measures could look like MCAP, grades. There could be the COGAT, there could be MAP. We don't know. There's a lot of different options.
What is going to happen to students for whom this current acceleration path is not working, but they still need more than what they would be getting in grade level instruction?
We don't have all the answers. It's likely that additional students beyond those that have that 4 distinguished criteria will be eligible or will receive some form of course acceleration, but we don't have clear guidance from the state or MCPS yet about who those students would be and how we might determine whether they're ready or eligible.
If there are students who are level 4 and getting a distinction on the MCAP, but they're in a school where there's not enough students for an in-person class, what happens to them?
I believe some students have access to virtual compacted math. I think this is going to be a really big question, especially as we see the percentage of students who are eligible for compacted math potentially dropping.
When will MCPS announce what their plan is on any of these issues for acceleration?
Yeah, so next Thursday on May 7th, MCPS is going to be presenting to the board its acceleration plan for both literacy and math.
Well, thank you very much, Emily, for joining us. It was a lot to unpack, and so we'll all be looking forward to that Thursday Board of Ed meeting.
Our third story for this episode is one about a combination of AI and human failure that seems to be prescient. ACLU has filed complaints with 3 Maryland County Police Departments on behalf of a woman, Kimberly Williams, who was arrested in Oklahoma in June of 2021 on a warrant issued in Montgomery County for impersonating other people to steal money from banks. Williams had never been to Maryland before she was arrested, extradited, and held here for 5 months. Nate Wessler is her ACLU attorney and picks up the story.
Ms. Williams was driving around with her daughter, who was making DoorDash food deliveries in a small city in Oklahoma, a city of Wootton. There happens to be a military base there, and so Ms. Williams and her daughter were driving onto the base to deliver food to somebody who lived there. I don't know if it's a service member or a civilian employee. And there's an entry checkpoint like there are at bases, and they ask for IDs. So she provided her ID, and the guard took it into the guardhouse and ran her ID, and it came back with a hit to an open arrest warrant from Maryland, something she had no idea existed. So the guards asked her to step out of the car. They held her there while they called local police, Oklahoma City Police, who came and put her under arrest because of this warrant from Montgomery County, Maryland. Police in Oklahoma wouldn't tell her anything other than that there was a felony arrest warrant from Maryland. She was held for 23 days in a county jail in Oklahoma, waiting for an officer from Montgomery County to come and get her and escort her under arrest on a commercial flight back to Maryland. She then spent 3 months in Montgomery County Jail trying to fight off charges. Once she got to Montgomery County, she was brought into an interrogation room and finally told what the charge was. The charge was that Police said that she had walked into several bank branches in Maryland in 2019 and 2020 and impersonated account holders and fraudulently withdrew funds. Now, the problem was she had, in fact, never in her life been to the state of Maryland. And at the times of these incidents at the banks, she was in Oklahoma for most of them, and then in Western Pennsylvania for the last couple. She had social media posts online that were geotagged to Oklahoma. Ample alibi evidence had anyone cared to look. What happened instead was that police had gotten an unverified lead from the bank based on an erroneous result from face recognition technology. So a bank investigator had taken images from security cameras in the bank of a suspect, had sent it out to a listserv of police and private investigators and corporate investigators. And somebody on that listserv, and the bank employee never revealed to police as far as we know who it was, somebody took it upon themselves to run this image of a fraudster through a facial recognition program and sent back to the bank investigator the name and image of Ms. Williams and said, this is your person. And Montgomery County Police, without doing any truly independent, reliable investigation, they eyeballed a photo of the suspect and a photo of Ms. Williams, and they decided they thought it was the same person. And so they went and applied for an arrest warrant. And as a result, an innocent person was dragged into jail. As I said, it was 3 months in jail in Montgomery County. And then even once she got charges dropped there, she was transferred straight to Prince George's County, where she spent another 2 months in jail, fighting off similar charges there because the banks that had been robbed spanned 3 counties in the state. The charges in Anne Arundel were dropped within a day or two of the charges in Prince George's County being dropped. Prince George's County, at the end of this ordeal, once all the charges were dropped, instead of, say, apologizing and paying for a trip back home to Oklahoma, they just put her out on the street with no money and no cell phone, expecting her to make her way home. She found a stranger who lent their cell phone, and she was able to call her kids and was able to get somebody to give her money for a hotel room for a night. And then her son drove from Ohio to get her the next day.
How old is Miss Williams?
She's in her 50s.
Do you know what bank it was?
Truist. I think there was a merger.
Are you also filing complaints against the bank?
We haven't communicated directly with the bank yet.
How did they find out that she was not reasonable suspect?
This speaks to one of the several really troubling problems with how police use face recognition technology, which is the secrecy. In this case, police, when they went for an arrest warrant, they did not disclose to the Maryland magistrate judge that facial recognition technology was the source of this purported identification, this false identification. Police just said that the bank had identified Ms. Williams as the suspect, and that detective agreed that she was a match based on a visual comparison. The way that Ms. Williams finally figured it out was by getting materials that the police had that they didn't disclose to the judge, particularly a short memorandum that this bank investigator sent to the Montgomery County Police describing his so-called investigation. And there was one line, really a clause of one sentence, that explained that he had sent out this listserv email and gotten back a facial recognition result. And in fact, once Ms. Williams came to us, we then had to file public records requests to all these police departments to get the full investigative files to really start to piece together what happened and what went so terribly wrong.
Okay, so the prosecutors realized in about 5 months that this case did not have evidence.
Yes, in each of the counties, the prosecutors decided they didn't have enough to prosecute. Now, it seems in at least some of the counties, maybe all of them, that part of the reason that they dropped the charges was that there's just no witness that they could get to come testify from the bank or the account holders themselves. And so their cases were, I think, falling apart in a few ways. But they obviously also just didn't have any independent evidence. They didn't have any actual reliable identification for Ms. Williams, right? Nobody could have testified that she was the person because obviously she was hundreds of miles away.
What arrangement of the law allows this entire thing to happen? A detective in Montgomery County decided to take the word of a bank investigator, a third party, I assume, on an investigation without verification. That seems highly improper.
Completely improper, but it has real echoes of what we've seen a number of times across the country. So, to start from basics, right? For police to arrest somebody, they need probable cause, and in almost every situation, other than police like witnessing a crime in front of them, police need to get a warrant from a judge first. So they have to go to a magistrate judge, demonstrate probable cause in a sworn application, and then get their warrant. And probable cause means real, reliable, fact-based grounds that show that the person likely committed the crime under investigation. There's a legal duty of the police in that sworn application to disclose all the material facts they know to the judge, right? So disclose the basis they have for thinking that they found the right person, that there's probable cause, and disclose anything they know that would undermine a showing of probable cause. And then the judge is supposed to be in a position to make an independent determination. What happened in Ms. Williams' case and what we've seen in really all of the 14 at this point known cases of wrongful arrest across the country due to this technology, Ms. Williams is the second one in Maryland, and the 14th we know of nationwide, is that police take a face recognition result, fail to conduct a reliable investigation afterward. Usually they do one of two things. They either put the face recognition result into a photo lineup to show to a witness, or the officer just eyeballs it themselves and compares it themselves to the suspect photo. Either way, when face recognition technology gets it wrong, in other words, makes a false match, it's highly likely that that false match is going to look like the suspect. It's going to be a doppelganger, a lookalike. And that's because that's what this technology is designed to do. In fact, the manufacturers of these algorithms never say that the algorithms can make a match. They're not designed to make a definitive match. What they do is spit out a list of possible matches that a computer has determined look the most like the suspect's face in whatever matching database they're using. That could be mugshots or driver's license photos or something else.
Which raises the question why Kimberly Williams' face was in a database in the first place. Does Kimberly Williams have a past criminal history?
She does. She, a handful of times, wrote checks that she knew she didn't have the cash to cover. A few of those times she was arrested and she was convicted in a couple of them. What happened here with her wrongful arrest in Maryland is partly a story of what is often called confirmation bias in policing, right? You had police take a result from an algorithm that they assumed was right, this face recognition technology, and then they did the bare minimum to confirm that initial suspicion instead of doing a real investigation to figure out if it could have been her, right? So they saw that she had some past arrests for a financial crime. So police saw that in her criminal history of her, and then they eyeballed a comparison of her photo and the photo of the suspect and decided they look similar. And they do look similar in some ways. That's how face recognition technology works. What they should have done is, you have to do a real investigation to figure out whether the initial lead is the right person, whether he even could have done it.
The other thing that's puzzling to me is how a detective can even do this. I mean, even without AI or facial recognition technology, this is improper conduct. I feel like the issue is the detective not following procedure. I mean, how do you legislate that?
Well, I think that really the way you legislate it is by barring police from using this technology. I think that it's just fundamentally too risky. And the chances, even with policies, of police relying on it too heavily and arresting people who have nothing to do with the crime is just very, very high. But there are, in places where politicians and police are going to insist on continuing to use the technology, there are some serious protections to put in place. And I think the settlement we got in Detroit is the best model of that, right? To actually spell out in a binding way an enforceable state law and police department policy that can result in discipline if it's not followed, to spell out exactly what police must do after a facial recognition search comes back before they can move toward arresting somebody.
Nate Wessler, thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Late last year, 2025, Montgomery County Public Schools introduced a new technology from a vendor called Volt AI that will allow artificial intelligence monitoring of security camera footage inside of MCPS schools. That's all for this episode. Be sure to check out our feature interview series that comes out Friday mornings. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta. Music for this episode comes from Silver Spring rock musician J.D. Brayton, who goes by the stage name Mr. Tree Frog. The two songs we play in this episode are Halo and Troubled Sleep. You can find his music on Bandcamp. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
You will never learn how to remind